We welcome to this important event Pedro Noguera, Professor of Teaching and Learning from New York University, whose brief biography is found in your program. An urban sociologist who focuses on public schools, he was chosen in the best of all ways. He was recommended by one of his former doctoral students, and when we learned that he would join us, our faculty, familiar with his work, were particularly delighted with what he had chosen for his convocation address. And I quote, "Education and America's future. What will it take to really leave no child left behind? Education and America's future. What will take and really make it possible for these children to have a future? What will it take not to leave anyone behind?" We are honored to present Professor Noguera. Professor Katzman was correct when she said, he's writing about our public schools and he can make a difference.
Dean Elmore, faculty of Boston University School of Education, I want to thank you for this honor, particularly Dr. Lauren Katzman for recommending me. I have the great fortune of taking Lauren away with me back to New York, where she can be at home with other Yankee fans once again. I want to say a special thanks to the parents, to the grandparents, the uncles and aunts and cousins, siblings, and children in the audience today because of your support for the graduates. You know that education is not the most lucrative field, but you've chosen to support them financially, morally, emotionally, and knowing that they're doing this for the best of reasons. And so I applaud you for that support. To the graduates of 2010, I want to applaud you and now speak to you directly about the great challenges we face in education today in our country. As all of us know, education is at the center of many important policy debates, which is interesting because there are so many other big debates going on over our economy, over the wars, over the Gulf, and the oil that's spewing out there. The challenges we face as a nation are sometimes just so great, it seems as though it's a bit much. But we avoid addressing education to our own peril. And as we know, this new administration has chosen to take it on. And as a result, there are major debates over policy that are swirling right now. For those of you who will be teachers, there's a notion that we should judge you based on the test scores of your students. And the federal government is pushing it, and several state governments are insisting that this is the direction we take. There are others who say that we should now evaluate teachers not based on seniority, but based upon performance. And that when we have to do layoffs, take that into account. And then there are those who insist that the best way to ensure that you do the least damage to our students is to assign you to teach a teacher-proof curriculum, where administrators will come and monitor you and make sure you're on the right page on a given day of the week, so as to ensure that our children do the best they can on this test they're required to take. For those of you who are going to become administrators, we know accountability is the order of the day, and the great pressure is on you because the threat of closing down failing schools looms large. And of all of us have watched recently what happened in Central Falls, Rhode Island. There is the great pressure to increase graduation rates, lower dropout rates, raise test scores. And all of that falls on your shoulders. And then, of course, the need to keep schools safe so that we are not yet again struck by a horrendous school shooting. Those of you who choose a policy career have the great challenge of producing innovation, because that's yet another slogan of the day. And increasingly, we associate that with charter schools. And there are those who think that the best way to ensure innovation through policy is to use data to monitor and evaluate schools. And so increasingly, you'll be looking at lots and lots of data. These are important issues facing public education. And I have to say, and you might have been able to tell already from my comments, I'm not exactly an admirer of the direction we're taking. And I say that as a person, I served on the transition team for the Obama administration, advised them on their education strategy prior to the election. Don't have much influence after the election. And increasingly, I find myself in opposition. One of the things that I oppose is the idea of using standards and accountability to judge schools and to hold schools accountable when we haven't done the work of providing those schools with the resources they need to meet the children they serve. I tried to explain this to Secretary Duncan when he was still responding to my emails. And I heard him say that he wanted to shut down failing schools. And it sounded so tough. I said, well, if you're serious about this, Arnie, and I could call him Arnie, you're going to have to shut down most of Baltimore, most of Philadelphia, Detroit, St. Louis. I said, shutting down schools is not a strategy if you don't have a strategy for replacing them, because the problem is too big. Too often, the rhetoric of education misses the mark. We had 8 years of a law called Leave No Child Left Behind. Who could be against that? No child left behind. Except the slogan, Leave No Child Behind, didn't come from the Bush administration. It came from the Children's Defense Fund. And when Marian Wright Edelman came up with the slogan, Leave No Child Behind, it didn't mean test the children as frequently as possible. It literally meant that in a country as great as ours, we should ensure that children get good nutrition, good health, have their emotional needs met, because hungry children don't do well in school. Over 20% of children in America today experience what the federal government calls food insecurity, meaning they don't eat on a regular basis. We have seen our schools, our public schools, particularly those who are most attacked and criticized, become all that remains of the social safety net for children in this country. Because even in the failing schools, children still get lunch, sometimes breakfast. If they're lucky, access to a nurse, heat in the winter, adult supervision. And while that may not be adequate, because we want much more, and they deserve much more, the simple fact is no one else is stepping up to the plate to provide that kind of support for our children. Our public schools remain the only institution that serves all children. The homeless, the undocumented, the children of the incarcerated, all children attend our schools. And not surprisingly, many of our schools are overwhelmed by their needs because they don't have the resources. And so it's going to take more than a fancy slogan of No Child Left Behind or racing to the top to get to the top. We're going to have to start asking ourselves, what does it really take to create the conditions that would allow us to serve all children? The good news is such schools exist right now. I get to visit many of them. Schools across the country that are showing us the background of a child is not determined how well they can do academically. And when you go to a school like that, you're reminded that the problem is not the children. The problem is the way we treat the children. The problem is our failure as a nation to create schools worthy of all our children. Not long ago, it was announced that there was a failed experiment that got a lot of attention. And this was the notion that came out of Harvard from Roland Fryer, an economist, that we should pay children for higher test scores and better attendance. And after almost 2 years of this experiment, they decided it wasn't working, so they were going to stop it. Now, shortly after it was announced, I told Roland Fryer, I said, I think this is a waste of time and money. And we said this on air on NBC, so he didn't particularly like it. And I said then, how many children will you pay? How long will you pay them? Even if it works, it's not a sustainable strategy. What's more, it completely overlooks all the other factors that influence learning and student motivation. A few days after the failed experiment was announced, we got another important reminder about what it really takes to educate children of all kinds. When Jaime Escalante died. Jaime Escalante, the great math teacher from Los Angeles, who showed us that it's not about paying kids, it's about really good teaching. It's about what he called ganas, which is creating the desire in children to learn. And how did he create ganas? Not by offering to pay them, but by telling them to work hard, to come in on Saturdays and to stay late, and to remind them that despite their backgrounds, they could achieve at high levels. And he proved it. Those are two important lessons about what it takes. And as I said before, I get to see it in action over and over again throughout the country, that there are schools getting the job done. I was invited to a school in the South Bronx just this spring, a school called PS 138. And the principal there said, I want you to see my school. We are a high-performing, high-poverty school. And I knew the neighborhood, so I said I need to go see this school, because the school is located right across the street from the housing projects that my grandmother lived in for over 25 years. This is a part of the Bronx that burned in the 1970s. It burned because the landlords decided it was better to burn the property and collect the insurance than to fix it up. So in the 1980s, it looked like a war zone, burnt out buildings everywhere, it looked like bombs had hit the place. President Carter called it a hellhole. So when I heard there was a high-performing school in this neighborhood where children from those projects that still stood were being served, I said, well, I need to see this myself. So I arrived at the school, and I'm greeted by a fourth-grade girl who's very happy to see me. She said, I'm your tour guide. And the first thing she shows me is the beautiful art on the walls and the student work on the walls and the articles and the awards that this school has won. So I'm immediately impressed. I'm impressed by the environment. I'm impressed by the recognition the school's received. Then she takes me to the library, a library full of books that she tells me every student is required to read at least 25 books a year, in addition to what they do in school. And the library is like a Starbucks with comfortable furniture, inviting to be in, because they want children to develop a love of reading. They believe the children who read well will do well on tests. Then she takes me to their computer lab and shows me where they learn animation and desktop publishing, because they think that kids from the inner city need to have access to technology. So I tell her, this is so impressive. This is a great place. She said, well, you're impressed now? She said, let me take you upstairs. It's even more impressive. So I'm wondering, what am I going to see on the second floor? When I get up to the second floor, I learn that the only museum in New York City that's dedicated to the history of the Bronx is in their school. There's a museum on the second floor, but it's not in a classroom. It's in the hallway. So the first thing you see is a picture of the Yankees. I'm sorry, Red Sox fans out there. The Yankees, when we got Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig on the same team. Picture of Joe Louis when he fought Max Schmeling. A picture of the Bronx family. I didn't know there was a Bronx family who spelled their name with a K, not an X. Owned a large farm. See the first album produced by Donald Byrd, a jazz artist who lived in that neighborhood. Subway car, furniture, old clothing from the 20s and 30s, all on display and all within easy reach of children. So I turn to the little girl and I say to her, aren't they worried that the children at the school might destroy or vandalize some of this? It looks like very valuable memorabilia out here on display. And the little girl looks at me like I'm some kind of sicko. And she says, you know, the kids at this school are very proud of this museum. She said, I don't know about the schools you go to normally, but at this school, kids take care of things. Why do I ask the question? Because I am too accustomed to going to schools that in the name of safety have made them more like prisons. I'm too accustomed to going to school which in pursuing the goal of high achievement by doing nothing more than test preparation. I'm too accustomed to going to schools like the one I went to in Oakland, California, visiting a science classroom where I saw no science equipment. And I asked the science teacher, do you have science equipment here? She said, yes, we do, but I lock it up. I said, you lock it up? She said, I lock it up so they don't break it. I said, well, do they ever get to use the science equipment? She said, well, when they behave, I will occasionally let them use the equipment. I could tell by the way she said it that didn't happen very often. It reminded me, you ever go to someone's house and they've got their furniture covered? As though they're waiting for that special guest to come? And you know if you're there and the furniture's covered, you're not the special guest, right? The kids at PS 138 are treated like special guests every day, and they respond like they are too. I believe if you can produce a high-performing school in the South Bronx, you can do it anywhere in this country. I believe schools like this do show us and demonstrate we can educate all children. Poverty need not be an obstacle to achievement. Neither should having special needs or having a single-parent household or any of the other obstacles and disadvantages that many of our children face. Our children deserve more, and our country needs more because education is implicated in every major problem we face and in potential solutions to those problems too. I want to encourage you as graduates to heed the words of the dean. Are you value-added? How will you make a difference in our schools? To be a great educator, you have to have a strong ego. You have to believe that when those children are with you, they're going to learn. You don't know where they started, but you're going to make sure they grow, they get smarter, more confident, more capable, better prepared for life. The goal of education has always been one thing, and that's not about raising test scores. It's about producing responsible adults who will be prepared to solve the problems of previous generations. If the kids get high test scores and get strung out on drugs, we failed. If they get high test scores and rob banks or cheat the stock market, we failed. We've always got to focus on character and ethics. And remember that as educators, we are always role models. They're watching you. They know if you wore the same shirt 2 days in a row. They know if you got a bad haircut. They know. And we have to then take that confidence and that tremendous responsibility in our hands to truly do all we can to make a difference. Someone asked me earlier today how I can stay optimistic. I said, I stay optimistic because I get to go in schools and interact with teachers and educators and students and parents who are indeed making a difference right now, sometimes under very difficult circumstances. That to me is inspiring. You're inspiring because of the path you've chosen and because of that decision you've made to take education on at this time. I remain very, very optimistic about our future as a nation. I wish you all the very best. Thank you.